Thank you, Tess, for the introduction. That's better. Yeah, so my presentation is going to be about some social research that the EPA commissioned in 2016. It was done by a company called Ipsos, and the actual executive summary and the full report is available on our website. I was unable to put the link in here, but it's basically, if you just go to our website, epa.newsouthwales.gov.au/publications, you will find the documents there. And the research was commissioned back in 2016, and so obviously it was all pre-China ban, but the findings from it are still very relevant for today. Now, this button. So I'm just going to talk about the research design, the high-level findings, some message testing, and some recommendations from the report. So in the design, so the outset, what the social research was looking at was understanding people's motivations to recycle, their values, levels of concern, and willingness to act or change their behaviour. It was looking at their capabilities, so this is awareness and knowledge about how to recycle correctly, awareness of the impacts of recycling incorrectly, and what happens to the material once it leaves their home and the curb. We also looked at opportunities within the household, so things like what are the things that are affecting people's households every day, day to day, that affects the recycling, social norms around waste and recycling, and people's perceptions and behaviours of others. So the actual research design was quite comprehensive. There's actually 4 phases, but just the first 3 phases were around, the first phase was we actually spoke to council waste officers. Then we did 10 focus group sessions across Sydney area, but also in the regional rural areas of New South Wales. We did an online survey of 1,200 people, and that also included additional surveys of 300 young people, 300 people living in multi-unit dwellings, and 300 people living with a curbside food and organics collection service. And those were because we wanted to really hone in onto those particular issues and explore them further through the research. And we also did some further focus group testing around messages and campaign materials, which I'll talk about later. So some high-level findings. So what we found, and a lot of this might not be of a surprise to you, but it's really good to have a research paper that backs up your campaigns that you might be doing. If you're looking for some support and some theory behind these messages, this is a good research paper for you to go back to and use it as evidence. So we've got here attitudes towards waste and to environment and recycling are high. Like 84% of the participants do still claim that environment, is still important to them. And so you can see some quotes there. People are concerned about the environment and the earth and things like that. And people feel that they are doing their part. I mean, they talk about things like we don't use shopping bags, we stop using plastics. But when we delve down into these behaviours, we found that what motivates people to have these attitudes and values and these behaviours is not really so much environmental concern. For some people, it's more about the fact that it's convenient and it's cheaper. So we just need to think about the way we message this information around the environmental concern part of it. While they say they're environmentally concerned, their motivations are slightly different to that. They told us that recycling is easy and that they're good at it. So 59% indicated that they did not require much effort to recycle properly. And most participants thought they were effective recyclers. And they reported that they act like they're on automatic pilot when they're recycling, that they don't put much thought into it. It's easy if you've got half a brain. So this is sort of going through the discussion, some of the key findings as we talk to people. They told us that they understand what can be recycled. So 94% of people believe that they understand which materials go into which bin. And that there were some key demographics there who had that feeling a lot more. So people over 25 years of age, so 26% of them, compared to young people, 20%, felt that they understood how to recycle properly. Men, so 39% of men had that feeling compared to women of 31%. And people living outside of Sydney, so 40% of them, compared to 31% of people living in Sydney, felt that they understood how to recycle correctly. So the majority of people do feel confident about how to recycle. We tested this. We showed them a range of materials and we asked them to indicate whether they were sure or unsure about how to recycle these materials. And majority of people said, yeah, we know, we're pretty sure about how to recycle all our materials. So when we did some further testing on this, we found that there is a core set of materials that people understand how to recycle. And to them, it's pretty simple. It's just paper, glass and plastics. And they got all those core materials, 89, 90% of people got all those core materials correct, knowing what bin to place it in. But then there's a grey area of materials that people are just unsure about how to recycle. And in this graph, we asked people how would they recycle this material, like the sort of photo of the material. We asked them how would they recycle that material. And you can see there, for example, drinking glass, 52% of people indicated that they would put that in their recycling bin. Ceramic plate, 31% of people said that they'd put that in their recycling bin. And then on the other side, you've got around 56% of people saying they were unsure, but they would put aluminium foil trays into their waste bin, and that they would put steel cans into their waste bin. So you can see there that these are the ones I put the crosses on. These are sort of some of the core materials that there are some confusion around how to properly recycle these materials. Now, I suspect that this is probably not much of a surprise to some of you in the room who do their waste audits regularly, and these materials are turning up in the wrong bins. But again, I think it's really good that the social research backs up your findings when you want to go and do campaigns to emphasise these materials. So people tell us that recycling is easy until they have to think about it. So at the beginning of the research focus group sessions, we asked them how difficult it was for them to work out how to just what bins does each of the materials go into. So before we tested them, we had 32% indicated that, well, it's not difficult at all, and around 10% indicate it's very difficult. But then after they did that testing and looked at those materials, and then we asked the question again, their stats changed. So it went down to 23% thought, well, it's actually a bit more difficult than we thought. So yeah, people are beginning, through the social research, they realise themselves that they do have gaps in their knowledge as time went on. So we also tapped into this a little bit further and found out that there's two schools of thought when people are unsure about how to dispose of a material that they've got in their hand. They either dispose of it in their general waste bin, so the thinking there is, when in doubt, just chuck it out, don't put it in the recycling bin. I wouldn't want to wreck up a whole bin's worth of recycling with one product. So these are some of the comments that came out of the focus group sessions. The other school of thought is dispose of the item in the recycling bin. They feel that, people who said this, it's council's role to sort this out. And they don't believe that the system could be so fragile that one item or a small amount of items could muck the whole system up. So they just put it in the waste bin from that. And they also said that if they thought that if it was that critical, that councils would be telling us all the time, and there'd be mass media campaigns about how to make sure that material doesn't go in the recycling bin. So that's another school of thought that exists out there. So from this, we found that 55% have little or no understanding of how recycling is processed, so they just don't know what happens at MRFs. And there's a lack of understanding, and that this lack of understanding leads to confusion and residents choosing not to recycle all they can. So some key, I'm sure some of this is probably not new to people understanding about this idea about confusion, but it's good to have the backing there. So we asked them to tell us a little bit more about what they thought we should do about all this, and this is the participants' views. They thought that councils are not investing enough in educating people about what can be recycled, that out-of-date knowledge and changes in what can be recycled need to be updated over time. So obviously the participants were sort of saying, oh, I didn't know you could recycle aerosol cans, and why didn't my council tell me that? So that was the discussions that were going on in the focus groups. Some thought that materials that can and cannot be recycled haven't changed. So there's a core set of people out there who are really confident about what is recyclable, and they consider themselves great recyclers, but they don't realise that some things have changed, and so actually tapping into those people is going to be a bit of a challenge. And they also said that they felt that information should be focusing on those confusing items that we've identified and the process. So what happens to the material after it leaves the curb. So this is an important next bit here I'm going to talk about around trusts in terms of what's happening with the China ban policy at the moment. So trust in recycling impacts behaviour. I think we're pretty clear on that. But it's interesting, like again, I said before, this research was done pre all this China ban stuff. So it sort of reinforces that we need to continue to tell these, to communicate to our residents the importance of how to recycle correctly. So again, there's two forms of thinking that came out of the findings. Some participants expressed confusion and distrust in the recycling system, and the two thinking here is a small minority of people believed that all recycling is taken to landfill and the whole recycling process is a sham. And those who held that feeling, they tend to be the ones that will be more resistant to any messages about how to recycle correctly. They're the sort of disinterested people, hard to reach, but I think we would kind of already know that. But then there's a larger proportion of people who believe that any level of contamination in a load of recycling causes the entire load to be sent to landfill. So many who expressed uncertainty were interested to know the truth of the situation. So I think really now is a really good time to be talking to people about how, what happens to the materials once it leaves the curb. So a lack of trust can lead to disengagement from recycling, and that's, I think, a key message and really, really important in the current climate. Where we live makes a big difference to the perceived effort. So on average, it takes nearly 2 minutes for people to carry their waste to the outside bins. And the key message here is that people living in multi-unit dwellings say it takes over 3 minutes. So we need to basically do something to make their systems easier for them, and the time it takes can be a demotivator for people. Something quickly on the message testing. So we tested some terminology. People refer to the term rubbish bin. It's commonly referred to as the internal bin, and rubbish is commonly referred to as the type of waste itself. The council provided bin was commonly referred to as the wheelie bin, the SULO bin, or the outside bin. And the use of the word contamination confused people. They thought of it as hazardous materials, and they didn't associate it with just being a material that shouldn't be in that bin. We also tested words like tin. Most people knew what a tin was, but some people thought that an aluminium foil tray and an aerosol can was also a tin. With glass containers, we also found that people knew what a jar was, a glass container, but they also consider glassware to be a glass container. So you've got to be really careful about how people understand these terms. An important point here is that we asked people how do they find out about waste and recycling, and we found that most people got their knowledge from their home, from their parents and from their upbringing, but there are a range of other places that people get their information from, and council is still the key place that they're getting their information. But a really important point that we found out was that proactive information search for information on waste and recycling is rare. We asked people in the last 2 years, have they actively looked for waste and recycling information, and only 21% of people had. And that's despite the fact that they told us that there are materials that are just not sure about how to recycle. So people know to visit the council website, but they know there's information on the internet, but looking for this information is rare. And we think that they told us it's because they're just not motivated enough to look for that information. I'm just going to click over this quickly, so I'm going to run out of time, but we did test a whole bunch of campaign materials and campaign ideas, and we also tested some taglines, and all that research accumulated into this sort of tagline, if you like, stop, think and recycle right, and that resonated really well with people. So just some quick recommendations. People felt that information about how to recycle properly was lacking. Some people discarded anything that looked like junk mail from council. They told us they just discard it, so we need to think about how we're going to get that information to their front doors. People like the idea of being communicating through TV and effective signage on and around bins, and they thought that cold communities should get some information through some sort of welcome pack for new people who come to Australia, and people who move into new areas should get some information on how to recycle through real estate agents. And they prefer visuals that were large, simple and easy to read. Residents generally feel very positive about recycling correctly. Campaign materials, one of the challenges you're going to have is how do we target those people who have that overconfidence about how to recycle? They already think they know how to recycle, so that's going to be a challenge. Campaign materials must incorporate specific information about how to recycle correctly, and education and reference materials should be clear, and you should use a range of different mediums such as flyers, bin stickers, websites, apps and things like that. With councils, it's better to trial a range of different mediums in the first place. Maybe ask residents to look out for the information coming in the mail, and for them to keep the information as a resource for future reference. Some residents would use a website website service or an app, but from this research we found that apps and those sorts of things should be used with caution, because some people just dismissed it, that they would never use an app to look up how to recycle. But I think things are changing in that area. And this, like I said, this was 2016, so maybe things have moved on that idea. We need to make sure that we tell people about the recycling process. And finally, we do understand that different councils have different collection services and bins and a mix of bins and things like that. So the best way for councils to do the recycling awareness campaigns is either to target their own council, or those councils who have collectively the same around each other. Your neighbouring councils have the same recycling systems to do collective awareness campaigns to get over those barriers. So that's it from me, but please do turn to the research that's now on our website, and it's a very, very heavy, long document worth a read. Thank you.